Well, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine continues to have global and financial impacts on businesses. McDonald's being the latest to announce it will temporarily shut down nearly 900 restaurants in Russia. The restaurant chain said it, however, continues to pay its 62,000 employees in the country. To talk more about this, we're joined by Kokkie Kooyman, Director at Denker Captial. Kokkie, good evening to you, and thank you so much for your time. So we're talking about McDonald's now, but of course we've also seen some of the multinational oil companies talking about wanting to move out of Russia. We really do get a sense that there is a broad global move to turn Russia into as much of a pariah as possible. Did you see things escalating to this point?
I think very few did, and in that regard we all misread Putin and his intentions, thinking that he was just trying to make sure that Ukraine doesn't join NATO, and you know, using to take this excuse as taking the two provinces, but very few actually anticipated him actually invading Ukraine. And at the same time, I think he himself totally misread the situation. He totally misread the response from the West, and also the Ukrainian resistance. But it does leave us in the world in a very precarious and bad situation where, as you pointed out, there are very few winners. There are a few winners, but generally the sanctions have been very combined. But bear in mind, it's all Western companies, US and Western companies. So far, there have been a few notable abstentions. China, obviously, although China could be sanctioned if their tech companies supply Russia with tech. And similarly, India has actually stood outside of this. And again, it's self-interest. India is a huge oil importer. Its economy is very dependent on oil, a bit like Germany on gas in Europe. So India has decided not to comment and to try and be friendly to Russia. But yeah, in short term, Western companies are really actually decided that under these circumstances, with Putin as president, they cannot defend to their shareholders doing business in Russia.
One author had this perspective, Kokkie, that the presence of McDonald's in Russia when they opened their first store there was a symbol of the fall of the Soviet Union and perhaps, you know, a country that was open to Western influence. Can we then, with that analogy in mind, take what is happening now as the withdrawal of Western influence there?
Definitely. And yes, I've actually visited the McDonald's in Moscow a few times. We've been visiting Moscow regularly, sort of every second year, to judge the investments there, the climate, the companies. And certainly you could see how Russia was westernizing. And this definitely reverses all of that. At the moment, one doesn't still know how it's going to play out, because obviously the population still want McDonald's, and they still want Pepsi, and they still want Google, and they still want Western products. But their president has basically decided, you can't have it. Well, I suppose it's a bit of take and throw, but certainly you're quite right. It certainly means a strong diminishing of Western influence and Western goods in Russia.
When we take a look at other big multinationals, so you've got the likes of big, coffee brand Starbucks, you've got Coca-Cola, Pepsi, all of those that had set up operations in Russia. Are you expecting that the natural thing is that very soon they will follow on, not just with a limitation of their services, but a full withdrawal?
Yeah, I think they will have to, unless they've got a very strong case. But generally, what really the Western companies are trying to do is follow the US and European governments in trying to almost force the population of Russia to stand up against its president and his policies and saying, what you're doing is hurting us. economically, lifestyle-wise, and actually in terms of death rate as well of Russian soldiers. And that's really the objective. So, any company that doesn't withdraw and remains there and remains profitable, will be certainly questioned a lot and won't look good.
What do you think are some of the big lessons, Kokkie, that we can take away in this moment? Because, again, it's been quite striking to see the extent to which the West is willing to exercise its muscle where it believes perhaps part of its interests are at stake. And there are others who would want to see, this kind of resolve applied to other situations.
Yes, it's a hugely contentious point, and I think we haven't seen or even tried to start thinking about the consequences. I mean, just the mere fact that the West confiscated or froze the central bank of Russia's assets, which means Russia couldn't defend its currency. Also, just the whole economic sanctions. And the risk of that is that you're going to go into a polarized world. That the Western economies and all those who believe in the U.S. as a parent or as a protector will align with it and keep using the dollar. But the risk is that countries like Russia, China, India stands in between. But a lot of those countries that are aligned differently will start seeing the risk of being dependent on the U.S. dollar, on U.S. systems. We shut off SWIFT, but Russia post-2014 already had their own SWIFT system alternative. China has had one as well. So they maybe combined their own banking messaging system. So I think you're definitely going to see a polarizing of the world in financial systems. And the other thing is, I think a lot of companies are going to be afraid or cautious about being too dependent on non-politically aligned countries for supply lines. So it's a strong move towards deglobalization, which means scale benefits will be less, which means generally the cost of products everywhere in the world will start rising.
All right, let's leave it there for today. Kokkie Kooyman is director at Denker Captial. Thanks for your time.